Today we are ranking Disney and Pixar music by the decade to see which decade was the very peak of Disney music. So keep in mind I'm considering Pixar films as well when making these rankings, not only Disney music. And I'm also including full soundtracks from movies, not just musical numbers. So a movie that doesn't have any musical numbers but still has a great soundtrack, like Ratatouille, can still be an important piece to a decade. So with those ground rules laid out, let's jump right in. Starting off, we have an honorable mention for the 2020s because they're still going, so it doesn't feel right to rank them, but they have a great start with Encanto. That leaves us with 8 decades to rank because I'm combining the 30s and 40s since Snow White was the only 30s movie. So in last place at number 8, I'm sorry, but I gotta go with the 1970s. I know there are some hardcore fans of these movies, particularly Robin Hood, but when comparing this decade to others, it just falls behind. Next at number 7 is the 1960s. The biggest contributor here was Mary Poppins, which of course produced some all-time legendary songs, and of course Jungle Book has its moments too, but it's a shortcoming in both overall quality and quantity that puts the 60s this far down. At number 6 we have the 1980s, and honestly the 80s are lucky to be this high. They rank dead last in quantity, but The Little Mermaid at least carries them up from the very bottom of the rankings. It's a shame for The Little Mermaid that it wasn't released in the 90s, so it could have been ranked higher. At number 5, the 2000s. The 2000s, aka the post-Renaissance era, were the valley between the Renaissance and the Revival eras, so it makes sense to see this decade in the middle of the pack. There are still a few powerhouses in this decade like Princess and the Frog, and while it does lack in quantity of musical numbers, this is one of the strongest decades as far as overall soundtracks go, with super strong instrumentals like Ratatouille, WALL-E, and Up. At number 4, the 1950s. While only having 5 movies, this decade packs an incredible punch with some of the most iconic songs of all time. And while every movie in this decade pulled its weight, the leader that carried it up to number 4 is undoubtedly Cinderella, with A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes being a song that I consider as one of the quintessential Disney songs. Taking the bronze medal is the 1940s. The 40s had a little of everything. Sure, there was some filler, but we have an experimental instrumental masterpiece that remains relevant to this day, a cult classic that shines every day in Epcot, the one that started it all, plus Pinocchio gives us another of what I consider the quintessential Disney songs with When You Wish Upon a Star. Deciding between first and second place was difficult beyond words. Renaissance vs. Revival both are packed with top tier songs. I actually flipped my decision back and forth multiple times while making this video just because it was so tough to decide. I started off by just getting rid of the movies that simply weren't moving the scale in this competition. That made things a little bit easier to digest. Each of these decades has a big 3 which just about even each other out, so I removed those to make the comparison even simpler, with the acknowledgement that those big 3s represent what are probably the biggest Disney songs of all time. At this point, the comparison became much easier. I really love the music from Frozen 2, Brave and Inside Out both have some really great songs, and Coco might be my all-time favorite movie from a music standpoint. But those 4 just can't reach the combined heights of the rest of the 90s lineup, so the 2010s take second place. And of course that leaves the 1990s as the number 1 best decade of all time for Disney music, and I don't think anyone can really disagree. Every single year, except 1993, gave us a movie that contained all-time great classic Disney songs. It's a streak that I don't think will ever be rivaled again, and a deserving champion of the best Disney song decade ever.